What I wanted was my time back, or to remember that it was my time, and that within it I was free. And quarantine was this gift, an opportunity to offer my time back to myself free of charge, to sink as deep into it and for as long as I wished, without having to reclaim it from anyone else. When you envision the world in which the United States government took the pandemic seriously and all these people didn't needlessly die, do me the small favor of imagining that in that world, the 50,000 words I wrote at the beginning of quarantine came together to make the foundation of a viable novel, which I then spent the next 12 months completing. Judge the first Corona lecture by any reasonable measure and it can hardly be considered much of a success, as even a year later it has yet to hit 250 views, and the average viewing time is just over 4 minutes, which is approximately 1/6 of the length of the video. But measure it by its effect on the operator, and this detour out of fiction writing proved creatively fruitful, leading to a year's worth of more or less fulfilling writing, consisting of, depending on how you count, and whether you include this one, either 11 or 13 further lectures, and contemplatively productive, while still resonating with a handful of individuals who expressed to the operator that they seemed to find something valuable in viewing them. One of the things that is compelling to the operator about the throne of the third heaven of the nation's Millennium General Assembly, an artwork he first saw at the Smithsonian American Art Museum more than a decade ago, is that it was constructed by the formerly untrained artist James Hampton out of inexpensive and found objects in a rented carriage house over 14 years, without almost anyone knowing about it until the artist's death. But even more important than this is that it is one of the most magnificent expressions of a personal spiritual and artistic vision the operator has ever seen. Maintaining social distancing during the summer was significantly easier than it was or would be during the colder months. This feels like some kind of revolutionaries. And they're traveling in a group. And it becomes gradually becomes clearer that what needs to happen is the kid needs to get to the destination. They're going to a train station. I can't remember if they got on if they were on a previous train and transferring, or if they drove to the train station, whatever. There's a delay, and the heat's coming down. And so one of the men who seems to be the leader, he makes the decision that he's going to murder someone to take up all the attention, so that the kid can get away on the train, and all the police attention will come to him. And there's a question of timing, what's the best time to do it? And I don't think it had happened. There was a lot of maneuvering and waiting and trying to figure out when the train was going to leave, because it was delayed, so it was off schedule already. In this long year, personal demons of distrust, intolerance, persecution, and despair, the cultural poisons of disinformation, political cowardice, misogyny, and white supremacy, undertows that had every one of us in their grasp at one time or another, shadows that had been growing in the darkness for decades and centuries, finally gathered their strength and rose, crested, and broke across a leaderless nation full of isolated souls, to capture us in the churn or dash us to the earth. A life without struggle is not the aim, for there is something in the human soul that can't ignite without friction, and a soul that hasn't caught fire is one still asleep. So what I desire for you is that somehow within the churn, at least for a time, you found a way to shrug off the burdens that are not yours but have been thrust upon you, to seek solitude or find community as you elect, and to discover the freedom to struggle your own struggle. As autumn deepened and the election approached, I was called to attend to the ghosts I felt within and around me, the failures of a past that would not stay past, and the stale hope in a future that kept failing to draw nearer. But sometimes our efforts are insufficient. Simple attention is the best we can muster, and the ghosts won't be exorcised simply because we want them to be. It is impossible to keep pretending indefinitely that our fates are not tied together. Know that the shadow resists most fiercely when it senses the light approaching. Picture James Hampton getting off work, heading to that carriage house, often after midnight, to work on his throne of the third heaven, bringing every resource he has available to bear on this project, his life's labor, working toward a perfection he knows is impossible in the earthly realm, and yet still must be sought. And tell me whether that was enough. The United States may have chosen a president, but it has not united behind a leader. And as long as such a significant minority has invested itself in the failure of the nation's chosen course, any progress will be as seashore captured from a receding tide.
It's like, maybe like inspired by the impeachment trial. Or like we're seeing testimony maybe almost of the right and left, different responses. In a particular like space which looked like a highway entrance ramp. More the highway side, parkway, or I guess interstate. More the interstate side than the, street side. With alternating protests. But it seemed that the left was in charge of the protests more. Like they could decide to have a protest or not. And they allowed to let the right have its protest. I can't picture anything particular. Just this kind of general sense of like the protest coming up and going down this kind of flow rather than particular images. And I don't know particularly what they were protesting.
That I received my first vaccination on the initial Monday of spring was of course mere serendipity, but meaning grows only when we feed and water it. And while technically winter was just as long as it always is, this last one felt like it took about 13 months to run its course. So you'll forgive me if I seize on the coincidence of the time during the seasonal cycle when life returns to the landscape, and the point where the scientific and logistical cycle of the development and dissemination of this vaccine intersected with my life. To envision an approaching return from the darkness of solitude to the sunlight of life lived among loved ones, and hope that a personal and creative flowering will accompany it. While it is hard to imagine that we live in the best of all possible worlds, it should be easy to grasp that we don't live in the worst, one in which our former abomination of a president was re-elected, or the attempted subversion of his diselection by spurious legal argument or mob violence was successful, where the vaccines took longer to develop, had more severe side effects, or failed to work outright, or where the calls for justice for black men executed by the police were heeded even less than they have been. None of which is to say that the losses we have endured have not been devastating, or that we should be satisfied with what we have, but is rather an acknowledgement that our actions can matter, especially when we band together, and a call to honor our suffering and gather whatever strength we can from it as we struggle to defend our progress and fight to make more. James Hampton's Throne of the Third Heaven of the Nation's Millennium General Assembly is a looking glass, and in it I see reflected a unified, transcendent aesthetic vision made manifest in tinfoil, cardboard, and old light bulbs. And the creator, who serves an individual artistic and spiritual vision to exhaustion, holding nothing back, unconcerned with glory or material reward. I see light worked in the darkness revealed, and true faith actualized, and what I hope for myself and despair I may never achieve. But also, perhaps, if Hampton's years of work in the dead of night in a rented garage may find a parallel in our months of pandemic-inspired isolation, a symbol of what work we have done in our solitude, and how it will shine when the doors are open to it.